ho! Merry Christmas!
You know, Santa, I still remember the year that you brought me the Nintendo 64 just like I asked, but you didn't bring me the adapter that I needed to actually play it on my medium-sized 120-pound TV. Speaking of unbridled terror, when most people think of Christmas movies, the genre they think of usually isn't going to be horror. But the truth is, horror and Christmas have a very long history, and at the very least, it offers people who maybe aren't all that big on some of the more joyous and sentimental elements of seasonal movies some holiday options. Or maybe you really do like those movies, but you still just want to switch it up in order to get in touch with the many, many moods of Christmas. Which are, of course, oftentimes murdery or involve scary children. Here we're going to dive into my current top 12 favorite scary Christmas movies, and it's a fluid list, but with 12 movies, let's just get to it. So I lied. Everyone lies on Christmas. There are actually 13 movies on this list because there's one movie that truly deserves an honorable mention, and that is Tim Burton's classic The Nightmare Before Christmas. The only reason this movie doesn't make this list is because I really just can't consider it to be a horror movie. It's dark, it has horror-themed characters, but it isn't scary. It's more fantasy than anything. However, if we were counting it, just for the record, this movie would actually rank all the way up to number 2 on this list, which is why it gets the shout out. We start off with 1989's little-known French gem, Deadly Games. It actually goes by like 14 other titles too, but I'm using Deadly Games. This movie is very much like Home Alone, and considering that this movie was released before Home Alone, it's not hard to see why director Renee Manzoor remarked that they remade my movie and threatened to sue for plagiarism. Home Alone's creator, the famed John Hughes, swore that he had never seen this movie, but admitted that there were some similar ideas. Never mind the fact that the kid in this movie isn't even actually home alone. He's got an elderly, mostly blind, and diabetic grandfather to protect as well. The movie pretty much bombed in France and was never theatrically released in the US until relatively recently being revived/restored. The movie follows young prodigy named Thomas, who, like Kevin Bannister, is incredibly inventive with traps and heavily influenced by films, particularly action movies. Oh yeah, and did I mention that Thomas has an epic mullet and that there is a montage where a battered and emotionally broken Thomas tends to his wounds and buries a loved one to a Bonnie Tyler song that Bonnie Tyler specifically wrote and recorded for this movie. It's one of the more depressing Christmas songs that you'll ever hear, and I think that the movie plays the whole damn thing. This movie legitimately just turns into a power ballad Christmas music video for a little bit. And just a couple of notes here. The movie is subtitled, and it should come with a trigger warning if you are sensitive like I am towards scenes depicting animal cruelty. Is it really Christmas at all until a cute little Pomeranian has been kicked into a ceiling fan and Fran Drescher has been set on fire? Well, both of those things happen in the very opening minutes of Santa's Sleigh, and let's be clear, anyone who knows me knows I would never condone any violence against animals, but in this instance, it's so cartoonish and over the top that there's no way to take it seriously at all, unlike in the previous movie. Oh, and I guess maybe don't set fire to Fran Drescher, it is Christmas. Now, I hadn't actually watched this movie until very recently because, I'll be honest, I grew up a wrestling fan and I always hated Bill Goldberg. I liked him for like 4 months as a wrestler until I started noticing that he couldn't wrestle at all and was just making guys who actually could wrestle look really weak. And since I'd also seen him cut promos, there was absolutely no reason for me to think that he could ever act any better than he could wrestle. And he totally can't, and he doesn't. But it's okay because this movie doesn't care about acting at all, or plot, or sanity. Santa's Sleigh just is, and that's what makes it charming. At number 10, we take a more serious turn and have the 2003 movie Dead End, which is basically the long holiday family drive from hell that just spirals completely out of control when the dad, of course, decides to take a shortcut for the first time in his life and ends up dozing off while driving. And of course, you know what a family drive requires: bickering, lots and lots of bickering. We have a brother and sister who squabble, lots of mom and dad tension, and a few homophobic digs that I didn't remember at all. And there's also some major family secret revelations. It's kind of hard to explain too much about this movie without giving away any spoilers, but basically the family finds themselves on a road that seems to never end, meet up with a strange and haunting woman in white, and are terrorized by a mysterious black car that appears to have no driver. It's a fun movie that really feels like a modern, potty mouth version of an episode of The Twilight Zone, if you're into that. People really like musical numbers around Christmas time, I think. So, what better way to celebrate Christmas than with a holiday musical featuring British teens and zombies? Yes, that's right, you heard me. This is legitimately a zombie musical, billed as Shaun of the Dead meets La La Land, and while it's nowhere near as good as either of those two movies, believe it or not, it's actually pretty good in my opinion. The songs are really catchy despite being a bit too sugary or pop on occasion. The humor is mostly smart and understated, and it goes to places you might not expect. There are also quite a few nods to zombie movies of the past here, such as Night of the Living Dead, the aforementioned Shaun of the Dead, and my personal favorite of the bunch, The Evil Dead. Let's be honest, kids are terrifying little monsters, and that's just all kids, not even just in horror movies. And yeah, I know, we love kids and they're so cute, but also that's how they get you. The story here in The Children isn't complicated. A family Christmas getaway spirals out of control when one kid becomes sick, and then quickly infects the other kids with some type of illness that makes them incredibly violent, and causes them to share some kind of hive mind of sorts. I didn't realize until recently that this was actually a remake of the 1980 movie with the same name, and I haven't seen the original, so I can't really judge it. But I can tell you that this remake has a higher IMDb score than the original, and it has a terrific atmosphere throughout. At number 7, we have P2, the 2007 movie starring Rachel Nichols and Wes Bentley. Both of those actors turn in underrated performances here. Nichols plays Angela, a hardworking young woman who finds herself locked into her parking garage with an obsessed security guard while working late on Christmas Eve. It's a simple but effective story that should keep you in suspense and features one particularly memorable and brutal kill scene. Also, just fun fact here, in Spanish, the title P2 sounds like the word that they use for farts. So Spanish distributors opted for the title Parking 2 instead of P2, which was totally the right call, because there isn't a single fart to be heard in this movie that I recall, and that sounds like something that I would remember. And also, since I've done it for the other movies, trigger warning for animal cruelty. What is it with horror movies going after animals on Christmas? And at number 6, I'm pretty sure this is the last one where an animal gets hurt, so yay. Whenever I talk about the Child's Play reboot, if you can call it that, since the franchise just reverted back to the old story after this movie anyhow, I always say that it was better than it had any right to be, really. Longtime fans were livid when Brad Dourif wasn't brought back as the voice of Chucky, and then they actually saw Chucky and they were even more upset. But the movie is good and maybe even improves on the original in a lot of areas. It certainly has more heart, as you actually kind of feel bad for Chucky here. He's not a cold-blooded serial killer with a foul mouth. He's just a doll with really bad AI programming. Or I don't know, maybe I'm just a weirdo who can feel more in touch with AI than someone who is a bad human, since I already think so little of humans. But all I know here is that Chucky really just wants Andy to love him and for Andy to be happy, until he's completely rejected by Andy, at which point he's okay with killing Andy because screw Andy. The story logically works much better than the voodoo magic at the center of the other movies, and there's obviously some commentary on commercialism, as those movies also had. And that's about as Christmas as it gets, really. Corporations and technology own us all, and they don't care if we live or die once they get our money and all that. Merry Christmas. And we kick off the top 5 with the original scary Christmas movie, 1974's classic Black Christmas. This is often regarded as being one of the first slasher movies, coming out the same year as Texas Chainsaw Massacre, and preceding John Carpenter's Halloween by 4 years. Even though creator Bob Clark has said that he considers Black Christmas to be much more of a psychological horror movie than a slasher flick. Interestingly enough, Bob Clark would go on to make the family-friendly Christmas classic A Christmas Story, which is the polar opposite of Black Christmas other than maybe decor. Bob Clark also gave us Porky's, so yeah. Now, Black Christmas was very successful in Canada, where it was shot, but not so much here in America. Years later, it would garner cult classic status, however, and it's said to have been a favorite among many surprising people, such as Elvis Presley, though he would die only 3 years after its release, and comedian Steve Martin, who complimented star Olivia Hussey on her role in one of his favorite movies when they later worked together on the movie Roxanne. She thought he meant Romeo and Juliet, but he was talking about Black Christmas. What happens if you take Home Alone, add a babysitter, lots of vulgarity, and then throw in a twist and more psychopathy than even Kevin Bannister ever displayed? Well, you get something like Better Watch Out, released in 2016. The movie even directly references Home Alone, so it's not hard to see the influence. But again, there is a twist or two here, and this movie ends up being less like Home Alone than Deadly Games was at the top of this countdown. And the twist really makes it difficult for me to talk too much about the plot here, so this is really just one that should be watched for oneself. If you're a fan of either Patrick Warburton or Virginia Madsen, you should definitely enjoy their roles as Luke's parents, although they naturally don't have a ton of screen time because, again, like Home Alone. And at number 3, we have A Christmas Horror Story, which was released in 2015 and is the first and only anthology movie on this list. It's not your typical anthology series, though, with the most famous example, of course, of a horror anthology being Creepshow, where one story follows another. Now here, the movie goes back and forth between 4 distinct stories, weaving them in all together into one overall package that is hosted by a heavily drinking radio jockey named Dangerous Dan, who is played by William Shatner. And I'm not totally sure that if this format was the right call or not. I will say that it can be a bit jarring and more difficult to follow than if they had separated the stories. But it does give the movie an air of differentness. I'm not sure that word would stand up to a challenge in Scrabble. Just to give you a gist of the 4 stories here. A strange couple trespass onto private property in order to cut down a Christmas tree and come back with a lot more than just a tree. 3 teens sneak into their school, which used to be a convent, to shoot an investigation into a past brutal crime that was committed there. One family is hunted down by Krampus while on a Christmas drive, and finally, Santa's Christmas is ruined when his elves start behaving very strangely, and he also gets a visit from his evil counterpart again, Krampus. I'd say the Santa story is by far the least scary storyline, but it is also by far the most entertaining. And what exactly do I mean by entertaining? Well, this is how Shiny, the elf, speaks to Mrs. Claus.
You're being silly, Shiny. You know how much you love my cookies.
I said I don't want a goddamn cookie! You reindeer fucking so.
If you stick around through the credits, one fun note about this movie is that the end credits say no elves were hurt in the making of this film. So, yes, Jingles, Sparkles, and even Shiny are all okay. And at number 2, we have 2015's Krampus, or Krampus. I don't know which pronunciation is the correct one. I've heard both. Krampus sounds like something you get after you go swimming too soon after eating, while Krampus sounds like a dance move that Shakira would do. And I guess, I don't know, I'd rather think about Shakira than swimming, I guess. I don't know. But let's face it, most horror Christmas movies aren't really Christmas movies. They're more just Christmas adjacent, if anything. But here we have a true Christmas movie. The entire plot of the movie revolves around the Christmas spirit, just like in most of the holiday classics we grew up loving as children, where Rudolph was being bullied relentlessly and Frosty literally died a slow death right before our eyes, or Ralphie wanting a gun out of everything in the world. Okay, so they're all kind of dark, but this movie has demonic Santa's helpers and killer toys and pissed off but still totally cute gingerbread men. And of course, most of us have heard about Krampus now. He's the twisted, evil version of Santa Claus that deals in punishment rather than reward. The family dynamics here hit home because almost everyone has those annoying family members who say all kinds of offensive and stupid things about politics, etc. And the annoying family members are also Steelers fans, and that definitely checks out. And I somehow didn't realize it until like just the other day, but this movie is actually created by the guy who brought us Trick or Treat, one of my favorite Halloween themed movies. So both of them really nail their respective holidays in my opinion. And maybe more than any other movie on this list, Krampus is one that you don't have to really be a fan of horror to like. Well, it's neck and neck with number one at least. And speaking of number one, let's be real. Number one was always going to be the 1984 smash hit Gremlins. It's one of the first horror movies that I ever saw, being kid-friendly and having toys all over the damn place. So it was my number one horror Christmas movie as a kid, and nothing has changed. Actually, this was my favorite Christmas movie, period, for a long, long time. And I still maintain that it is better than any Christmas classic that doesn't have either gremlins or legitimate swear words. And seriously, if you didn't want a mogwai after watching this movie when you were a kid, or even if you watch it now as an adult, then there's something wrong with you in my opinion. Who cares if they produce evil little gremlins that will overrun your entire town and kill a whole bunch of people if you spill just a little bit of water on them, or if you feed them a past midnight snack? They have little feet and they sing. Like my cat is singing right now, if you can hear her. And let's not let Gizmo's cuteness leave Billy's dog Barney totally out in the cold either. Barney is a cutie too. And I haven't even mentioned Phoebe Cates yet. And that'll put a bow on my 12 days of Christmas horror video. I hope everyone who's watched this has happy and safe holidays, and I'll hit you up with another video sometime soon.